Yeah.
Will that work?
In January, it's the time to pick a class. And we can pick,
So you might just do, if it's red, everybody can hear you.
especially for seniors.
If it's red, everybody can hear you.
Okay. I'm waiting for Harold. Then we'll get started. What? He's here. Good evening. I'd like to call this study session to order. It's a joint study session with planning and zoning. So welcome everyone. If we could stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. Welcome everyone. This is a study session, so it's a little less formal. We basically are just discussing things between our planning and zoning committee. And so there are no motions that are being made. We're having just a free-flowing discussion basically on our agenda items. So with that though, we still do call the roll. So Casey, could you call the roll for us this evening?
Councilmember Al Forsman.
Here.
Paul Kess.
Here.
Jerome DeVellis. Brian Callen.
Here.
Angela Campbell. Adam Bisbee. And Mayor Omerza.
I am here. Planning and zoning. Who calls the roll for that? Or do you just want to do introductions like we did last time?
Okay, we'll do introductions. Mike Davis, the
Microphone. Sorry.
zoning. Mike Davis, the planning and zoning chair.
Emily Rose.
Dave Hernestman.
Jeanette Ultra.
And
Scott Kokenriffer, Planning and Zoning Administrator.
all righty, very good. Do we have any additions to our agenda this evening? Any additions? Any old business? All right, we do have our zoning map up, so thank you for whoever got that, because that was requested from last time. And we can continue our discussion with planning and zoning to discuss the updated evaluation of permissible and conditional uses list. 1 and 2, zoning district definitions. Harold, are you taking this away, or?
Sure. Page 1, zoning district definitions. You can see on our zoning map on the upper left-hand side, zoning districts, R1, R2, RT, C1, C2, AB, O, M, P1, P2. All those definitions are here. AB, which is adult business, only zone in Ely zone map is way on the southeast corner beyond the cement plant. Public 1, lands owned for the establishment of public services, utilities, structures, and other buildings necessary for health, safety, and welfare of the public. So P1 on the map, that's a hospital area. Also, it's the school area, Whiteside Park area. Also over where the college is, Minnesota North College, that is zone P1. P2, land owned for the establishment of services, utilities, structures, much the same definition, safety and welfare of the public. P2 P2 we have where the old public works garage is, also where the cemetery is. Those are the two P2 zoning districts within Ely. The other P1, I missed it, over Seamers Park Beach and where the water treatment facility is. P2 is where the wastewater treatment facility is. Open is old, land owned by the public that could support recreational space and land to limit development in areas not yet suitable or capable of sustaining development, which that would mean is areas that do not have infrastructure available for further development. And on the map O, you can see some of the areas around Miners Lake. We also discussed just prior to the meeting with a Park and Rec individual member is over east of 88. That is city-owned land over there off the rail grade. That would be zoned O. Then we get into commercial 1, commercial 2. C1 is typically the business corridor or downtown. C2 is property used for businesses that require larger amounts of land to conduct business and desire highway frontage. So C2, you can see over by Zook's grocery store on Highway 1, that vacant gravel lot owned by Lustig's along the old airport road, that is C2. And then C1, of course, is the blue corridor stretching up and down Sheridan Street and also Chapman Street. That encompasses the majority of the business district. Another C2 area is where the Grand Ely Lodge is located. Those are our C2 districts. Also, where the trailer park was located, that is on C2. Industrial and related is M. M on the map. You can see where the lumberyard is, the greenhouse is, Lustig's roundhouse. That is all zoned as M, which is industrial. Other areas of M, I think that's the majority of our M zoning district. Rodlo's Industrial Park, that's also a very large area, zone M, and that kind of translates then all the way around into the Ely Business Park, going all the way back to Piney Road on Miners Drive. So that whole area is M. Our recreational trail overlay, this is an overlay district over existing zoning districts and provides for more thorough development requirements in areas sensitive to public use recreational trails. Residential transition is zoning where it typically connects between residential and then commercial. So we do have the areas on the map in brown. There isn't a lot of them, but these areas here, these are RT. On Camp Street, over towards the steam bath and the old Ford garage, on Conan Street, and then over here along Savoy Road, 17th Avenue. Those are the residential transition zoning areas. R1 is pretty much what it sounds. R1 is for single family and up to 2 family occupancy. Residential 2, R2 is for multiple unit housing. So where you would see apartment buildings in Ely is R2. Where it's more single family residential, it's R1. And Shoreline, Shawa Lake, and Shawa River, this is an overlay district as well. Go to the next sheet, subdivision 13, Shoreline, Miners Lake, same thing, overlay district over existing districts in the Miners Lake area. And then shoreline mixed use is to provide for the intermixing of lake-oriented uses, including both public and private businesses, recreational opportunities, and residential uses. The shoreline mixed use zone is over in Spalding on Miners Lake. So those are the zoning definitions. You can see over time these have probably been revised. 2004, 2012 was another revision. From what I understand, City of Ely zoning, probably mass zoning occurred in the early 60s. So as we know, a lot of these businesses, a lot of these buildings were built prior to this zoning designation being brought through. So a lot of the rest of the agenda is discussion about how do you fix some of these areas that were zoned as one thing but had a historical use of a completely different use. So that's our zoning district definitions. Then I saw the other question concerning these chart of uses is what does an O mean and what does an X mean? An O means that the use is permitted in that district only if a conditional use permit is granted by the Board of Adjustment. So every place you see an O, that would require a public hearing, that would require notification of the public within 350 feet of that property. And an X means it is permitted. That means it's permitted without a variance, without a conditional use, without a hearing, anything. So those properties and those uses where it shows an X, that's what is the permissible use.
Any questions so far for Harold?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
When we look at this map, the chart of uses, is green, red, and yellow, are they all additions to some degree? I guess just for clarity.
I'll answer that question.
Yeah.
Those are my colors.
Those are your colors, okay.
Okay, so when Mauro and I started working on this, like 3.5 years or so ago, I started color coding this so that we could visually see what we're discussing there. At this point, you could probably discount those colors. They're not really necessary for this discussion. We just were the development with the final result is that we came up with. And also, this is not just a moral Caruso in my head. This was done in the Planning and Zoning Commission with all the commissioners involved. And each one of these things was discussed and agreed to, recognizing that some of the members are more new than when this was originally started. But that doesn't mean that what was done in the past is no longer valid, because it was a valid commission with a full quorum. The commissioners that came on after this thing was started participated somewhere in about the middle of this thing. You guys agree with that? Yeah.
So I think mainly the intent is everything on this side of these sheets is the existing, what's currently in code, and then what is on the right side of the sheet, that is what's proposed. So the changes from left to right are kind of a culmination of the work of planning and zoning over many meetings over the last, as Mr. Benowitz had mentioned, over the last 3.5 years. And again, looking at our chart of uses and our zoning designations, to change any of these zoning designations, to expand them, to shrink them, to change them to something that, whoever may want it to be that way, whether it be the council or a property owner, it takes that same process. It takes notification, it takes a hearing, it takes 2 readings of the ordinance drafted by the city attorney, and then that's recorded, and then the zoning changes. And that's where some of this RT that's changed. This used to be industrial, it changed to RT because there are homes built there. This area here, we've got the old Ford garage, which was an R1 zoning district, which we all realized was a Ford garage since before any of us were born. So then it was changed to an RT zoning district to then make those uses allowable. So that's where some of those zoning changes have occurred, is where we're trying to correct errors or issues that had pretty much started when the zoning code was adopted, which I understood to be in the early 60s. from what we've been able to look back on. So I see we have the next item was residential transition district. I guess I don't know where the discussion was on RT. Yeah, so that was just more of the definition directly from the code, so. Okay.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, so there were a number of things that were the reason for starting this whole thing in the first place, and that was we were working with Craig Kramer at the time when we were working on a comprehensive plan. We looked at the map at that time. Our zoning was really a patchwork, a lot of different zones all through the city. So we were trying to have some coherence, some rationale about why this is zoned this way and why it should be zoned a little bit different. So, as an example, the two properties are right next to City Hall, the Campbell property and the Matson property. We ended up changing into residential transition so that they could continue to run their businesses because it was actually zoned R1 before. So just trying to do some corrections like Harold was saying, and then also try to get some uniformity throughout the city about where the zones are and not have an individual property, mixed in with, R1 and that kind of business. That's basically why we started this thing. And eventually this should be, part of our thinking process for the comprehensive land use. Because that becomes a document that everybody needs to adhere to.
It's a smart person in the room.
You're referring to it, but I can't
Yeah,
see it from over there, so it's like,
Yeah.
and I don't have a copy of it.
But to Mike's point, that's where that map, we are working to revise that map and have an electronic copy of it. It's just, there has been so many changes to that map within the last probably 5 years. Every time we go to draft a revision to it, then there's another rezone that we're working on. So this winter, a task for Scott is to work with our engineering firm, JPJ, and then have those zoning districts revised as to everything that has been put into code, since 2007 when we last revised that. So a lot of that's already indicated on that map, but then we'll have an electronic copy of that map. And our hope is to eventually have that included in County Land Explorer. So when people are to look at a property, click on it, the zoning will also show up as another layer. So that's where it's important as we go through this to try to get this as accurate as possible. And where we know there are existing uses that don't conform to the zoning that currently it's been zoned as for probably decades and decades, either it's corrected through this chart of uses, or it's corrected through what it's actually zoned as. So that's, I think, a big part of the discussion on a lot of the other agenda items are, well, this is what's currently there. We think of industrial zoning. We have a roundhouse, which has been used as a contractor's maintenance facility for many decades. Right adjacent to it was an outfitter in the same industrial zoning in the depot. Outfitter wasn't allowed in industrial zoning, but that is what has been there for many decades, again, probably for 40 plus years. So that's where the task at hand for planning and zoning has been pretty difficult as you kind of go down the rabbit hole of, okay, well, this should be this. You can't spot zone every building in town to be, well, this one's going to be C1, well, the neighbor should be C2, and while the third one on the block should be industrial M. That's where this takes a lot of time and a lot of discussion, because there are ramifications if you just take and blanket rezone properties without taking into account what existing uses are. I know another point that's been discussed for probably just as long as the commercial district and then the apartments that are located above those businesses, you know, in a C1 zoning district. So I don't know, Mike, if you can touch on that. I know that's been kicked around for a very long time.
Not much to add.
But it's,
I do notice for that, on that particular question, it is, it's line 6 and 7, but 6, top right of the handout. It shows apartments, 1, 2, 3, 4 units, as apparently not being allowed at all in C1 and C2 units. Those are blank boxes. And in fact, its current use is that there are apartments above many businesses, almost all. So that's an issue that we would need to address. At the last meeting, I think they were maybe suggested that they get conditional use permits or something like that. And I thought, that's incongruous.
That's not what we discussed, Paul.
I know, but now
Can you turn on your mic?
there's no
Thank you.
allowance for them now.
Okay, so let me address that a little bit. What we agreed to, or what we didn't agree to, what we said in the last meeting is that those are all grandfathered in. There's no changes required.
But any new business that started would have to get a conditional use permit to have an apartment above it. Well, it wouldn't be allowed, actually.
In commercial, yes.
Would not be allowed.
So we should propose.
I don't think that there's that restriction in commercial, to tell you the truth. I don't
The
see
box
any
is
restrictions.
empty, it doesn't show it as an allowable use.
It was my understanding when we were talking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that we talked about primary use and secondary use. So I thought the primary use was on Sheridan Street or some of those structures was retail. And the secondary use is rental.
That's
So
fine,
there
but
is
we
that.
need to reflect that in our
But it
definition.
is, am I wrong in, do I remember that correctly? Do I actually remember something? Let's start with that. And is that,
No,
am I
you're
true?
correct.
Is that true or not?
No, you're correct. That's what we
So
discussed.
and on page 19, there's something to that effect, but I don't know if that's,
that was just a code section.
or is that just a code section and then pulled it off?
Which is possible.
I think,
Go ahead.
I think that is a good point. I mean, if we are going to, is the change, particularly just to cover the apartment issue.
I agree
Because
with
it
it.
appears the change is to not allow apartments, whether 1 through 4 units or 5 units, in a commercial district. But if we do allow language where we change the definition, as long as the primary use stays X, Y, Z, I still think you might have room for confusion on this issue if you don't perhaps yet look at a conditional use.
It seems disingenuous, because if you allow it, we should say we allow it.
Because new owners do not necessarily have the right to continue the use, which was previously allowed. Unless it has a recorded conditional use, which frankly has been a problem in terms of how procedure was in the past. Not all properties received the conditional use recorded, even though they may have received one. So we are running into that issue a little bit.
I'm worried about that, Kelly, because if I bought CCO then, and I wanted to rent those apartments above it, I would have to go through a conditional use permit because I'm a new member. And that may not be an allowed use in the condition, in the C1 district.
This just pertains to the primary use. So if a business down below, let's say, is running a business in C1 and then supplement to rent apartments upstairs, then the way I interpret it, it wouldn't matter, but I see that we had it as conditional use and kind of a cover-all, just you keep the conditional use on there, in my opinion. I don't know why we're getting rid of the conditional use there, but
And it's just making it allowed use.
And that's maybe something planning and zoning could, you know, could take a little bit closer look at to, you know, perhaps making it either allowable as a secondary use. You have, you know, within our commercial district is huge, actually, when you look at that. That's a big district, and there are a lot of residential homes in there, and there are a lot of, there's a lot of rentals now with the Airbnb changes. There's quite a few rentals within. Currently, that would be restricted in this, because some of those homes are actually, like, I think of one right across from IGA. Yeah, the Hearthside, that I don't think they have any commercial use, so they may be solely resident apartments. So under that, our preface, they would not be allowed. So I do think it's worth looking at a little bit closer.
It does say that, Kelly, on line 56, it's a dwelling, single family. You read that across to the proposed the chart. You could not operate or have or build a
56.
56, yes.
56.
5-6, bottom of the first page. You could not have dwellings, single or two-family dwellings. And if I purchased one of those, then I would have to get a conditional use to operate to do that. So every single-family home on Sheridan right now, if it sells, has to go through a conditional use process. According to this, it does. Is that right, Kelly?
According to the proposed zoning, they wouldn't even be allowed, because there's no O on commercial.
So if I'm hearing you right, Mike, you know, a lot of it has to do with existing use, what its existing use is today, and then if it is a house that's let's say it's a building that's right now a commercial retail business, and somebody was to buy it and want to convert it back into a home, that would not be allowed, because it was.
That's correct.
That's correct.
So Secret Sisters is in that category.
That was a commercial property, and if it's being planned to be renovated into residential again, would that require conditional use, or is that grandfathered in because it was so I think maybe just a little more refining of what primary use is, secondary use, and then what's the solution for those properties that, you know, have transitioned from a retail space to residential. And I guess the only other point I wanted to make is I think we should be promoting the apartments and the dwelling units above these buildings to be occupied. I know of some other main streets, some downtowns where the commercial establishment is downstairs, and then the upstairs have sat vacant for decades. They're not being utilized, which actually leads to some, you know, kind of some blighting issues. So primary, I know we want to protect the commercial district, and I understand that's probably the intent. As a commercial corridor, we want to protect the amount of commercial properties we have, so we don't lose that commercial designation for them. But yeah, how do you balance out what's being used now, and what could be the potential in the future? Conditional use permit applications for at the point of sale would be very, very contentious and difficult. A lot of property sales would be contingent on if a conditional use is provided, which is very, very difficult. So I think that's a good task to take a look at more in the commercial district, especially with some of those housing units. And if there are specific properties, I think we need to look at those individually and see what the solution is. Maybe just in some language in the ordinance.
Just my 2 cents, I'm a little bit reluctant to use the primary and secondary use framework. When I look at other cities and other codes across the state, I don't see that as a primary function. I normally see them use acceptable conditional use type mentality. So just something that I would encourage you, maybe if we could find a way to include it in the way we talk about conditional uses, I think that would be a good way to do it. I think it adds for confusion is what I'm trying to say. I just think it can be very confusing as to, well, is that your primary use? Isn't it? What does that mean? I think it's too confusing. And I don't want to diminish, I know you guys have worked very hard on this, so it's, I'm not at all being overly critical.
That's okay.
Okay.
We're providing information.
Yeah.
We're not the decision makers.
Yeah.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
regarding the same topic, yeah, I do think that the residential and apartment in a C1 should be an allowable use, a straight exit. And you can look at the 300 block on the north side of Sheridan Street as a perfect example. You have you know, what was the Matt House? It's been both commercial and residential over the years, and it's flipped back and forth. You've got Bonnie's house there that has always been residential, right there in C1, and then the front porch, which has gone back and forth. And I think for those property owners that own that, I think that at some point, you know, the market's going to determine the use of those properties, and these buildings were built as residential homes. They have proven the ability to function as a C1, but I do think that owning that property, whatever the market bears, that's what they should be able to be. And if you go across the street then to Mike's Liquor, you know, I mean, there was a hotel about that. You know, that was a hotel in my lifetime, and you know, it residents and it is commercial business downstairs. These should be permissible uses without conditions in my mind. I do think the market will have an effect on what they become, but they've proven that they can exist in that manner too.
And we should be encouraging that, given our housing situation, making more of those kinds of properties or investments available to people, I think is a good idea.
I think you're hearing us, but. All right. What do you think of yourself if you're moving to a city, a smaller city, and you're buying this place, and now you have to go through a hearing and whatever? I can see the confusion being like, all right, no, I don't want to tell you what I'm doing. I don't want to fill out any more paperwork. You wouldn't want to take a risk, and why is it their business what I'm doing? You can see, I can feel the nerves and the anxiousness of it, especially if you're just going to be living in a house, and it just happens to be on one of the busiest streets in the city. I mean, I understand that. Go ahead.
I think another piece of that is when we established the rules for short-term rentals,
Right.
we kind of wrote the rules to encourage more short-term rentals in the commercial district than in residential district, as far as not putting as many restrictions on them, not requiring certain things that were required in the residential district. So, and that's kind of the way it's been. I think it's been developing that way. Theater is an example. Folk school building, another example, where all those upper units have been improved and I believe they're all occupied, so. But I think beyond residential transition, then it was zoning district schedule. That's pages 5 and 6 and 7. And that is more about the district, examples of basic provisions, what they're meant for, and then if they have restrictions on footprint, sidewall dimensions, lot width, all of those things, setbacks, all of those things. So what's of note when it comes to, you know, setbacks and these designations, commercial districts typically have, C1 especially has no lot line setback. So that would be a core downtown area where you do see businesses with shared walls, and then, you know, they built out to the footprint of their property lines. So that's typically what's allowed in a commercial district. Where we kind of get into some difficulties is we know of some areas within our industrial, our M zoning district, where it was built as C1, but it's now zoned industrial. So we've got property owners looking to add on to existing buildings that do not have any setback from the property line. So that's where we have to look at, is that a variance application, is that something we look at, how that's zoned or what the definition is within that zoning district. So, you know, that's something that has just come up here in the last couple of weeks. So a lot of these issues or concerns or questions or agenda items are something we're dealing with right now, you know, and have been coming up over time, but it's without some resolution, you know, it kind of limits what property owners can do, you know, what their development improvement plan is moving forward. So that's, you know, that's kind of the importance of the zoning district designation, what these setbacks are. I don't know, did you guys have anything else on that? The designations? Mike? Scott?
No, but let's talk about that business park stuff in a little bit here.
We have a question real quick before we move on to business park. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a concern with the footprint. I know that, you know, especially with cost of building nowadays and the fact that people aren't building because of that cost. I look at my own home, which the footprint of my house when it was built would not be allowed under this because I would be under that 750 square feet. Now, since it was built, they did add on to the back a few feet onto the front. So I am just over that 750 now, but at the time it was built, the footprint was smaller. I would have had, I think it would have been more like 650 or something like that at the time it was built. And it's a three-bedroom home with living upstairs. So I do think that having that could be limiting to the ability to build. You know, and I have a decent sized lot. I have an 83-foot lot. You know, and so it's a small house on a nice lot, but it's a nice lot. You know, so I do think that we should have some more flexibility to have that requirement. It seems restrictive.
In that chart, it's, you know, 768 square feet is the minimum square foot on a single family, for a single family home. We've actually looked at times changing covenants to make that larger when the concern was, well, people are building larger houses, that's a larger taxable market value, so that's why that requirement was made. The second phase of Spalding, it was going to be 1,200. The council revised that by ordinance and changed that and took that covenant out because we were starting to see home construction prices of $400 to $700 a square foot. So whether the house is 768 square feet or 600 square feet, the market value is considerably higher than what it was probably when that 768 was considered. I guess one of the main concerns then also was sidewall width. So they wrote the sidewall width at 22 feet to deter from single wide trailer houses from being built in town. You know, that doesn't happen very often anymore where people are requesting that. And we do get people requesting the ability to maybe not build a tiny house, but build a house smaller than what was typical. So 768 square feet is at, you know, 650. If somebody in how we've been over time, if folks are presenting or proposing to build a house smaller than, we tell them, put it together, bring it forward, let's take a look at it, let's see if we can find a solution for you. or if a variance is required. And I think there are a couple that did get variances down on Pioneer Road just because of that particular reason.
Those variances were given because the lot size was so small.
That's right. But would planning and zoning think it'd be appropriate to maybe look at that square foot, the minimum, from 768 to maybe something, what's going on in the industry?
Get into the tiny home discussion? Because that's where we're headed.
I guess, what's the definition of a tiny home?
Go ahead.
Yeah, that whole definition of tiny homes and its impact on neighborhood values and things like that. But there are a number of homes that would guess a substantial percentage, not substantial. You look around Ely now, and I can, there are small houses, you know, 20 by 24 kind of things like that. Older homes, just would never meet this 750 kind of thing like that. And so we're saying that's inappropriate, and I'm not sure. People live comfortably in those homes and they fit into the neighborhood. So I guess I am willing to look at smaller footprint sizes.
It's difficult for the planning and zoning to manage what you're suggesting without changing the ordinance. So my preference is that the city council look at making an ordinance change so that this doesn't fall on the shoulders of the planning and zoning to issue CUPs because it becomes subjective. It could involve personalities. It could be a number of things that it's just not a way that really operates, in my opinion.
The interesting thing about tiny homes is everybody thinks that they're built to be very inexpensive, and most tiny homes are very expensive because every square inch of them does something. So they're tightly fit, they're small, but every square inch is available for something. So they're usually, it's fine craftsmanship. So tiny homes like the one in Duluth that was being sold for how much money? I mean, it was a work of art on the inside. So tiny homes does not equal tiny money. They are works of art on the inside. So I think that's also something that people need to realize, that if you have a tiny home, that does not mean tiny money. They're built for a certain lifestyle, and I think we need to keep that in mind as well. Go ahead, Ed.
Would the council like, maybe Scott, to maybe research a little bit as to what other communities are doing when it comes to minimum size within an R1 zoning district? I think it's come up as a question enough in the past few years. Again, we've proposed this to folks that are interested. They never did really come forward with a project. You know, there was discussion in the past about, well, let's zone a district, let's zone an area for tiny homes. Well, that's very, very difficult to do. If you're going to invest in the infrastructure, the water, the sewer, the roads, you know, you really don't want to tie it to, well, every house in this section is going to be this size. You know, I think hearing you, we're a little more open to what is the project, what are they proposing, and as Mike had referenced, a couple of those lots were tiny, they were small, they were, you know, they didn't have a lot of depth, and that's how they made their project work, and you know, they're valued.
Yeah, most very lots were irregular shaped, and you know, triangular shaped and some other odd shapes, but so they weren't standards of lots at all.
Okay, now, I've lost my spot on the agenda.
You're at business
part?
part.
All right, business part, here we go.
Business park covenants. Well, I added a bunch of extra information after I actually had the agenda put together, so I apologize for all the 15A through Zs. But I thought it was important to look at what the Ely Business Park plan was back when that was developed. As we think of the business park, you know, many think of from, you know, Pioneer Road all the way through pretty much to 17th Avenue. You know, it goes past the college. And actually, the definition of the business park is shown on that one map. And it's actually from the county services building to the Department of Revenue where the VA clinic is now located. So that was actually where the business park, that's the definition as far as what these covenants were established for. As we know, things change over time. What was once, I remember we designated this a job Z zone, because at one time that was an incentive that the state was allowing for some possible development. So much like that changed and went away, the needs of the community have changed. In that corridor now, you have the government services building that was an irresistible link at one time. You have the, next to that, Twin Metals. You have the VA clinic. You have the Department of Revenue employees that are working out of the city building. And beyond that, now you have the rec facility. That's, Ely Community Foundation. So we've talked about this in the past, the covenants, the requirements, the plan. Things have changed, to better define, what is desired in the business park. We also have the next business park 2, which is farther down and on the opposite side, those lots that are available. So as we look at this, again, looking back on maybe some of the zoning changes we had to do with the RT because of the old Ford garage and other things, we look at the same thing at the business park, where you have, and as you go to the west, you have the veterinarian clinic, you have Steger Mucklux Manufacturing. So there are businesses within it that were, that's what the business park was intended for, but some of these other uses, it really wasn't, but this is the area they developed. So, fortunately at the time, they were allowed the projects move forward. They've been a great asset to the community, but now we need to look back and go, okay, now, at some point, we need to go through this and go, well, this is great at 10,000 feet 35 years ago to think this would be great. This is our ideal, vision of what this will be, but it's not anymore. So that's where I think that ordinance, we're gonna have to go through, revise it, and if there's, some additions, I think there's gonna be more things removed than added. And within, it's zoned industrial. That's where we go, is that the proper zoning for that whole area? Probably not. So that's where the whole business park, the covenants, the plan, the zoning is something we need to, look at a little harder.
Go ahead. We'll let Mike go first and Paul. Paul's been waiting for this for a while.
Yeah, I'm reading through the packet, there's no zone that says business park. So within the business park, you could have all of these, you could have M, you could have C1, you could have C2. So I don't know what we should do with the business park booklet that apparently it was put together as like an advertisement or a promotional kind of thing. I noted that some of the setbacks that are in that packet are different than what's in the ordinance. So there's a number of things, with that. So we struggled, for instance, with the rec center. I mean, we had numerous meetings over that before we came to a conclusion. We were really trying hard to make that project go because the community really needs childcare and some of the other things that they're planning on doing in there would be a benefit to the community. So we tried really hard to look at what the rationale was for changing the zoning for that. But like I said, there's no zone called business park. So within the business park, there could be numerous zones.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, as I look at some of this, the development that's happened over time has been somewhat opportunistic, whether it's Twin Metals and did they meet the covenants? I don't think there's anybody really looking at their height requirements and things like that. But there are good businesses to have in town. I think, and I was on the original committee that set this up, along with Kelly's dad. we worked hard to make this happen, and there were a lot of environmental concerns from railroad spillage and things like that. And so it was developed in the sense, though, that it would be sort of an epitome of our C2 districts, which are separate from the retail districts, requiring more land, more parking, more space, sort of thing like that. And the businesses that are there now, I think Chip was the first one, and he got in before anything happened.
Even road is there.
Yeah. But so it's been somewhat haphazard according to zoning definitions down there. And maybe it's time we simply eliminated the business park covenants and went with a C2 district, and the requirements that go with C2. And I'm not sure that that's the answer. It depends on our intent as a council as to where we would try to locate those kinds of businesses. I did notice too, even on your proposal, that daycare is not allowed in that district. So that whole,
P1.
huh?
The rec center, the Ely Community Foundation Rec Center is zone P1.
It is now?
It is now, yeah. And actually, it was on the end, I think it cuts off the end of the, yeah, it would be the last lot on the business park map. So on that map, it's shown as red there, is P1. And then next to it in blue is C1, which is where the VA clinic is. So there has been some zoning changes on that over time. But Paul's point, things have changed. They've made sure to make the zoning work for what the use is. I think it's time to look back and C1 for the rest of the district, a proper zoning. We still do have some
C2.
industrial use.
Not C1, C2.
Or C2.
Yeah.
C2. Yeah. And
It's
that's a matter.
a delineation in my mind is retail. I did notice though on your proposed description, under daycare, on lines 50 and 51, to locate in that area of C2 and M, they're not public. They're not even allowed in public. Daycare is not allowed in the zoning that it is. So we need to clean that up.
It's childcare. Is it between childcare center and daycare?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Okay, well, the reason for that is that D is for public, and this is a private enterprise. Unless the city is gonna start owning daycare centers, then maybe we should put something in there. But otherwise, that's why there's no designation in B.
Childcare is allowed on line 38. As you come across proposed, it is an O in all districts except for C, M, except for M. Yep. And except for, it is allowed in P as a conditional use.
Is there a distinction between daycare and childcare center?
Apparently.
Good question. Maura and I went on the internet and we were trying to find definitions for those things. And we gave up and decided to just leave both those definitions in there, like you decide.
Okay, but they should be consistent. They're treated equally.
There is a difference between the childcare and daycare. You can have like an adult daycare center, but it wouldn't be for children. One was just sold recently.
It does call daycare as family daycare serving 6 or less children. That's what it says in the line item. Under that 7 or more, I assume that's referred to be children as well. There's no reference to adult daycare.
I think it's fair to say some of these definitions are a little bit questionable. Even when I look at drive-in restaurant, I'm not sure exactly what a drive-in is. Is that where you used to get like a car hop service, I suppose? I think it means drive-through. I think some of these are just how we think about, some of these terms nowadays. It's just, we can go through and make some adjustments on this too.
Yeah, I had some discussion with Roger Scrubber about this, and it seems though that there was a lot of consternation about putting this thing together, so they put a lot of stuff on this paper and went with it. But right now, we're trying to get a little bit more precise about these definitions, and so those are really good questions.
Well, I'm sure to take some of them off would be very hard for some.
Can I make one comment about the business park?
Please do.
I do have some thoughts on that. When the blocks were platted, that's actually a plat with 2 blocks, and then lots in it. I don't think that there's actually a zoning, designation, which we should do. And we certainly could, do an ordinance that essentially zones it C1 or C2. And then we could also remove the covenants. Because the covenants are like an underlay. If you have the zoning up here, the covenants are down here as special restrictions within those plats. So we could certainly remove that code language, zone it C1, then that might, for clarity purposes, allow majority of what we're addressing here. That might be a good fix to that, just as long as we're on that subject. And you're right, it was meant for marketing. At that time, it was like, we're not sure how to use, we're trying to attract these people, and so we were
Business parks
marketing.
were the rage back then.
All rage, yep.
Just tell them.
So just some thoughts on that.
So, to take this a step further, my question would be, who is going to part and parcel out the taking apart the business park? Are we going to have planning and zoning take care of it? Is the EDA gonna take care of it? Is another committee gonna take care of it? Because I think we need to know who's gonna help with that.
Well, any property that remains unsold is, owned by the city of Ely. So we also need to take that into consideration as we're not just looking at what has been built, it's what we want to see built for the next lots. This is in ordinance form right now, so it would have to be the city council to want to have this ordinance changed. And the city council can direct city staff, which includes planning and zoning administrator, to work on potential revisions. I'm just gonna warn you that this is gonna take time.
Right.
These changes to zoning don't happen quickly, and that's for a reason. Because we wanna make sure to get these zoning changes right.
But
So later we could direct city staff to the planning and zoning and clerk and Kelly to have some ideas about this. To kind of come up with a recommendation as to how the council should go forward. If it requires another subcommittee of some sort to help planning and zoning clean this up, then I'd be glad to serve on that, but it would probably take some professional work up front to sort out the issues.
go ahead, Alan.
And I expect that would be done by like next week, right?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Alan.
Well, and I think as we look at these uses, you're gonna find that no matter how much time you spend on it, someone's gonna come up with a great idea that is a use we would want to permit in an area that doesn't fit into any of those things, or vice versa. It's like, well, I guess that really does fit there. You have a building like the revenue building that it's like, who would have thought, hey, this is gonna be the best place for a daycare in our community, and it fits very well. The traffic, and I think as Paul and Larry designed it, or were on that committee, that was furthest thing from their mind at that time. But now we have that building, and it really is a perfect facility for it. So as much time as you spend at it, remember it's gonna still be a work in progress at best.
I guess as we move forward with this, I'm concerned that planning and zoning has a lot on their plate, so I don't want them to be too overwhelmed
Yes.
with putting one more thing on their plate. So that's just, I want to keep that in mind as we move forward. So.
And I think that was my point is, I don't think this goes back to planning and zoning. Okay, what do you guys think the solution is? It's, we can work on what we think the solution could be and then bring it back to them, because you know, the work the committee did on this over the many years, because I attended many of those meetings, and there was a lot of drawn out discussion about changing them, combining them, you know, it takes a lot of time, you know, and to be bogged down, a committee to be bogged down with this would be pretty difficult, so, yeah, that would be my thought. We work on it internally, we come up with some recommendations, and then go from there.
With everybody's help, of course, but I just don't want to put one.
Just as a matter, I think the attorney would probably bill us on an extraordinary basis on this. This is not part of the ordinary duties. We should expect that, but this doesn't come cheap. Harold's not coming cheap.
So far. All right, next step, are we good with that? Are we all okay with the direction that's headed? Yes, yes, yes? Okay. Primary use for structure definition.
I think that
We kind of talked
related
about
back to
that.
the C1 district and the secondary use, so
All right.
that's.
Storage tanks.
I was not at that previous meeting, but I believe there was a lot of discussion about storage tanks and, you know, if it was allowed, in what zoning districts. So this is, you know, we fall under the requirements of the state of Minnesota, the state statutes, and guidance from the NPCA, you know, whether it be noise, pollution, you know, above ground storage tanks, underground storage tanks. So, you know, obviously there's a lot of guidance in here concerning that. And then secondary to that is the Minnesota rules concerning EAW, and that one's pertaining to storage tanks. I think right now, as you look at Ely and you look to see where storage tanks currently exist, whether it be a service station, the tank farm, that's actually, majority of it's in town of Morris, but those are the areas where we currently have tanks. If there was somebody proposing additional storage tanks in any of the zoning districts, it would have to fall within all of these requirements within the NPCA. And then the categories required within the EAW that's attached to it as well. So again, I wasn't at that meeting to understand what maybe some of the concerns were, but I believe it was something concerning C1 and C2, if that was to be combined into one zoning district.
I can comment on that. I do believe that, I was thinking of the example of the Public Works building, actually, where we have P2, and I think that it said that you couldn't have storage of materials like we did. Well, we've got a nearly $12,000 gallon propane tank, we've got diesel fuel and gasoline all stored there at the Public Works facility, which somewhere I believe we saw as we were going through this at the last time that those weren't permitted there. You know, I mean, so obviously they are there. Obviously they're a requirement of the type of work that those buildings provide. So rather than leave it unaddressed, I thought we, you know, it's something that we should. I wish I could remember where it was that I saw the conflict.
The school district use that.
So I think it kind of goes back to that primary, and maybe Kelly can interpret that too, you know, you briefly see that definition in there. I mean, that's not, the primary use of that isn't strictly as a fuel storage facility. Now, I think if we were looking at, like what's right out of town, like Trail Rack, now it's supplementing the business that's there. So I don't foresee that being an issue. Again, now if it's a standalone, you know, we're gonna sell gas there and they're gonna do that type of stuff, then I think we'd have an issue with it, but that's my interpretation of it at least.
Very good. Thanks for the clarification.
We're good? We're good? Okay. Minnesota rules, EAW, did we cover that?
And that again was,
That's,
you know, that's actually related to all of our zoning,
okay.
but it was included as part of this fuel storage category, I believe was the intent. But again, we fall under not only our code as a charter city, but also under state statutes. So sometimes our code is silent on certain things. We look at state statute on those, correct?
So,
That's with pretty much everything, if our charter is silent, or any of our codes are silent.
correct. Typically, our code and our charter is to be more restrictive than what state statute, or to provide additional definition or restriction, and then we fall back on the state statutes, if it isn't stated within our code, so.
So then classification was permissible, conditional use.
This is a big list.
All right.
So I think ultimately what we want to have accomplished is revisions to this list, and then for those to become codified through ordinance. So I think through our discussion tonight, we have a few items to still kick around, look at, especially that C1 area with apartments above the commercial businesses. The daycare piece, of course, childcare, and what's the difference between the two. And then the dwellings, what the definition, or how where do we allow those? Do we allow them in C1, or do we write an actual definition on that? So, I don't know if anybody else, any particular notes or questions concerning the current to the proposed on the rest of them. There's 134 lines within this. So, as Al had spoke to, it's impossible to have every single possible use or what we could think of. Yeah. But we have had some other projects come up. Storage units was another one that came up recently that I think it was silent on our chart of uses before, and now we're looking at, well, storage units, where will those be allowed? Because it's one of those things, as I travel around other communities, look, where's their self-storage units? And they are in their commercial district, they are near the businesses, they are near the residential. It's typically not something that's stuck away over in some industrial park out in the corner, so it's allowable in some of those commercial C1, C2 type zoning districts, so.
Go ahead, Mike.
Just for reference, just to go through about 25 lines will take about 90 minutes. So if you want to go through all of these things, you should allocate at least that much time to grind through this, all of these lines. So just FYI.
I guess my question to Kelly would be, so we get these inquiries and kind of like all of them said of, we could approve this tomorrow and then all of a sudden somebody comes in with something new. Is there a way to have the proposal heard in some way, in some fashion, and then whether it goes to both planning and zoning, then goes to final approval of the city council because it's not on the permissible use list? Is there a process for those?
There is not a process, but in essence, the council would have to allow that use in the zoning. So we would, in the past, we have done some amendments to this classification list for various needs. I can remember doing them a couple times in the past based on some proposals that came forward. That's probably how we're going to have to address it. If there are things outside the scope of what's already written, the owner, the proposed venture would come forth and say, okay, this is what I'm looking to do, here's what I'm looking to do it, what district or what area, and then we could move forward and do a zoning code. But it does take time, that's the thing that always, and it's very hard to do in retrospect. And sometimes we see that people jump into projects and then in retrospect, the zoning is not sufficient. So it's just a public service announcement, it's really important to talk to planning and zoning first, because that would help. And then, yeah, you could bring it to the council, and the council is very much open and willing to work with people. I think that's been historically the tenure on the council.
that's the question I get, and, you know, some people, yeah, we're working on our list, you know, because they do, that's the biggest thing, people call and inquire about a property, what can I do with it? And so more or less, if they would petition the city council to add that to the list of permissible uses in whatever zone that they're in, and then kind of.
And the easiest way to do it is have planning and zoning recommend the change, then it'll come onto the council agenda. Then the council agenda will either approve or disapprove of the change. If they approve it, then I would create the zoning code change.
So they actually come to planning and zoning first.
I would, because usually the council will say, what does planning and zoning think about this?
Right.
Yeah.
And each one of those would.
Projects does the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And it would require a zoning amendment, which would require a hearing, would require 2 readings of the ordinance,
2 readings of the ordinance.
or any changes on this chart of use.
Yeah, that is one big thing. If you do change, if we do change the chart, the classifications or the zoning, that requires a public hearing. So irrespective of planning and zoning can look at it and give their blessing, but they will still require a public hearing.
Which makes sense. I think for me, the biggest confusion in all this is the primary and secondary use to me. So if we could just say the use.
And I think that can be accommodated. We'll think through it a little bit.
Yeah, for me, that's the hardest part for me, looking at a lot of these. Anything else? So the next step is, what's the next step?
I think just like we said, those chart of uses that we discussed the most, the apartments, the zoning districts where they're allowed, not allowed, primary use, secondary use, kind of come up with a good solution for that.
Okay,
I think probably what I take away is kind of our biggest point of discussion. And then, once we kind of concoct a resolution for that, we'll bring it to planning and zoning can make it as a recommendation, bring it to the council, and we'll go through it. Whether or not that'd be another study session, I don't know. And if anybody has questions, concern on any of these uses within here, just let me or Scott know, send us an email, whatever, and we'll look into it.
and then the business plan is separate.
Yeah.
A business corporation.
Yeah.
Will be separate.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a workable solution to everyone? Workable solution? We've got this? All right.
Right, next meeting.
You can keep, yeah, if you want to make another meeting, feel free. We appreciate your work. Thank you for everything you've done.
Well, thanks for entertaining us too.
All right, have a lovely evening. With that, we are, well, you've been dismissed. With that, we are adjourned. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you for your time and commitment.
Oh, then the very last page. Yeah, don't worry. I mean, Storage.